DC Dual Force is quote-unquote coming soon, so before we get any more news about the game, I wanted to speculate a little bit about the factions of the game. For those who don't know, there are 5 factions in DC Dual Force. We have Tactics, Energy, Might, Tyranny, and Anarchy. During deck building, you'll select 2 of those leaders, one from a differing faction, although you might be able to play mono, like you might be able to just play 2 Tactics leaders. We actually don't know that yet. Regardless, you select 2 leaders and then build a 40-card deck from each of the factions that you've selected. We've actually only got 11 cards revealed at the moment, but I wanted to take a look at each of them and see if we can identify the faction's identity. None of this will be black and white because this game lets you mix and match all of your factions. So let's say, for example, Might is the control faction. That doesn't mean that they're not going to have aggressive cards. Warrior's identity in Hearthstone is obviously sustainability and control, but it's definitely seen its share of aggro meta decks over the years. Let's focus on Energy at first. Energy has 2 revealed cards so far. We have the Flash and Minion Dr. Fate. The Flash could be perceived as a quote-unquote aggro card because his first ability lets you make an attack twice, but attack twice can be just as risky as it is beneficial because you're sacrificing health as you do it. If you're bashing into minions, that's going to hurt you. Plus, his second ability is a 4-cost ability. That 4-cost ability lets you play an additional turn. The Dr. Fate minion generates cards for you. It's currently unknown what those cards are because we don't actually have any idea what a spell is. We know what actions are, those are revealed to us, but no information on spells just yet. My current guess is that Energy will be a combo-oriented archetype, mainly because of my perception of the Flash. Also, just based on the name Energy, I think there's a decent chance we do see some type of cards that maybe give your leader additional charge or make your abilities cheaper in some way, but holistically, I expect the class's identity to lean into long-form strategies involving multiple card combos. If Mr. Negative was an archetype in DC Dual Force, it would be an Energy card, I think. With that said, Mr. Negative would not work in this game because, well, there's no cost of cards. So, bad example, but you get my point. Might is a fun one to speculate about for a few reasons. Firstly, we have 3 Might cards, which is the most number of cards we have for a single faction. First, I'll tell you my conclusion, then I'll tell you how I got them. My conclusion is that Might leans a little bit into the aggro category, but really it's focused on mid-range minion control. Really, I think it's going to be all about putting as many minions on the board as possible. They want to full board as much as they can. Both Superman and Wonder Woman have buff abilities that are associated with minions directly. Well, Superman's actually says character, but that includes minions. With Wonder Woman going so far as to double their minions' attack values. Plus, our only Might card that we've actually seen so far is an action card that buffs minions. With that said, there is an argument for Might actually being a control archetype because both Superman and Wonder Woman are very tanky leaders. Superman having the highest defense value that we've seen so far at 19, and Wonder Woman having 17 defense, along with a keyword similar to Divine Shield that's just called Shield in this game, which is directly bound to her attack ability. So yeah, Might could absolutely definitely lean into that control category. At the moment though, I'm going to go with my first interpretation, which is that somewhere in the mid-range category, but really focuses on putting minions on the board. In the Tactics faction, we've actually only seen 2 cards. We've seen a leader, which is Batman, and we've seen an action, which is to the Batcave. I think Tactics is primarily going to have a tempo identity. The keyword on Batman Ambush prevents him from receiving damage if he defeats the target of his attack. And his second ability lets him search the top 3 cards of his deck and then draw one of them upon hitting the specific target of a gadget. Again, we don't know what a gadget is, similar to the spell situation we talked about earlier, but he gets to upgrade that card and refund half of his spent energy. The quote-unquote upgrade, quote-unquote ramp, and the ambush keyword screams tempo to me. And if I was designing a faction of cards based on hand-to-hand combatants in a world full of superheroes, characters like Batman, characters like Robin, characters like Nightwing, characters like Red Hood, I think I would probably make them lean into that tempo identity. Maybe not Red Hood, because Red Hood might actually fit into Tyranny and maybe even Anarchy. Yeah, maybe Red Hood wasn't the best example there. Tyranny is a difficult one to make an argument for because we've only seen 2 cards and neither of them are a leader, so it's really difficult to gauge what their core identity is when their core identity piece is missing from our analysis. But I'm thinking that Tyranny is going to lean towards control. I mean, really, all of these factions will have some amount of control cards and some amount of mid-range cards and some amount of aggro cards, but my thought is that Tyranny will be the one with dramatic board swings, akin to something like Priest or Warlock in Hearthstone. Thin the Herd at the silver quality, which is its mid-range quality. It can upgrade once, and it has only been upgraded once because it goes bronze, silver, gold. At silver quality, it's able to defeat up to 2 minions with just a single action. That's already going 2 for 1. Now, granted, the opponent needs a full board for that to actually happen, but worst case scenario, it's destroy an enemy minion, so 2 for 1 at best. And I'm sure this won't be their only tool along those lines. Community member RG, who I was actually talking about in my last DC Dual Force video, they pointed out to me that Tyranny could actually lean more into that tempo identity, while Tactics might lean more into that control identity. They cited to me that Gorilla Grodd felt more like a tempo card than a control card, which I actually certainly agree with, but I'm still going to lean a bit more towards Tyranny having that control identity and Tactics having that tempo identity, if not literally just because the flavor of each faction. You know, Tactics is our calculated hand-to-hand combatants, and Tyranny is our dominant villainous evil people. But you know, we're working with such small sample sizes of cards here, it wouldn't surprise me if Tactics does end up being the control and Tyranny ends up being more the tempo. It's hard to say at the moment, but that's the fun of this speculation, right? We're speculating before we have this information because it's fun to talk about. Anarchy is the last faction we'll be going over today, and I believe this faction will have an aggressive identity. Harley Quinn has an average of 4 damage on her 1-cost ability, which is insane compared to the other characters. The other characters usually have 2. Superman has 3, so a little bit towards the higher end, but for the most part, they usually have 2, and Harley Quinn doubles that by having an average of 4 up to 6, and at the very worst, it's the same as the other attack abilities at a 2 value. And that's just on a 1-cost attack. The only downside being, of course, that she attacks at random, but assuming you have a decent control of the board and assuming you're actually fighting for it in some way at all, her odds of hitting a leader are really high. There's 2 leaders on the board, so if the opponent only has 1 minion, the odds of you hitting the leader is in your favor. It's 66% chance to hit the leader, 33% chance to hit a minion, and in most cases where they only have 1 minion, you probably want to hit that minion anyway, especially if you roll that 6 or that 4 or whatever you need to actually kill the minion. You're probably better off doing that anyway. She doesn't have a lot of health to work with as well. She's only got 16, so you can certainly see how she can be used aggressively. Now, she does have that board clear ability, but I think the second ability is less of a board clear ability and actually more of a damage dealing ability. It feels like a board clear ability because you're running around and you're hitting everything, but I think that's meant to be the downside. I think you're meant to want to avoid using this while the opponent has lots of minions, because if you use this while they have minions out, you're going to be taking a lot of damage. So you want to clear the opponent's board and then use this ability to deal 6 damage to the opponent, 3 to each leader, as opposed to having to attack into minions, which you're going to be receiving damage for as well. The only thing that hurts my Anarchy equal aggro identity theory is that Punchline is not really designed to be an aggro card. She's a 3/3, which seems like on the lower end of stats, even for a bronze card, I'm guessing. And based on what we know about the card, she seems more tempo-oriented than, say, aggressive. But in a world where your leader is Harley Quinn, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe you need a little bit of tempo to make that aggro leader gameplay really come together. All right, well, that's all we have to go over today. I went over every faction and what I think their identity is going to be. Just to quickly surmise things, I think Energy is going to lean into combos, Might is going to lean into that kind of mid-range, maybe a little bit control-y play style, but it's really going to focus on putting minions on the board. Tactics is going to be a bit more tempo-oriented. It's going to really be trying to fight for the board. Tyranny is going to be more control-focused. It's going to be able to swing board states. And Anarchy is going to be a bit more aggressive. At the end of the day, none of these identities particularly matter because you're going to be mix and matching all of this stuff. I mean, if you can go mono decks, like you can just build a Tyranny deck, for example, there will be examples of that. But excluding that thought for a moment, you'll always be mix and matching these things regardless. It doesn't matter if Anarchy's pool of cards are supposed to be all aggressive. If you're building a control deck underneath the Might category and there's a handful of really good Anarchy cards that happen to be a little bit control-y, we can put that in our Might deck, or I should say in our Might Anarchy deck that is supposed to be control, and then those identity lines become a little bit blurred. But I still think it's important to point out these core identities if we notice them. But I still think it's cool to speculate about these identities regardless. I mean, we have class combinations in Magic the Gathering, but each of those classes still have that kind of core identity, even if they can lean into different aspects of the game. All right, that's going to be it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome. Leave a like to help the algorithm and stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one.